King's Landing had never felt colder to Sansa Stark, even though the sun was shining brightly over the Red Keep. Ever since her father's death, her world had twisted into something dark. But now, with King Joffrey sitting on the Iron Throne, his madness had become worse than anyone had feared. He didn't just enjoy power, he enjoyed pain. And Sansa was his favorite target. Every day, he humiliated her. He made her kneel in front of the court, called her a traitor's daughter, and once even forced a servant to strike her face while the nobles laughed. The Lannisters pretended not to see. Even Tyrion, who had once shown her kindness, was helpless under the growing wrath of the boy king. But something changed the day Joffrey ordered Sansa to marry him immediately. Not as a ceremony of love, but as a punishment. He wanted to make her his queen, just so he could break her completely. That night she cried alone in her chambers, her back against the cold stone wall, whispering to herself, "I have to leave. I won't survive here." Far away in Castle Black, Jon Snow had heard whispers. Ravens carried words of unrest in the south. But what caught his attention most was a letter, unsigned, with only a single sentence. "Sansa is in danger. If she stays in King's Landing, she will die." Jon froze when he read it. He hadn't seen Sansa since the day he left Winterfell. But blood was blood. He couldn't ignore it. He spoke to Sam, who warned him not to abandon the Night's Watch. But Jon didn't care. If the wall means watching my sister suffer while I do nothing, then maybe I don't belong here anymore. He stole a horse the same night. No goodbye, no word to anyone, just a black cloak, ghost at his side, and a determination stronger than any vow he ever made. Back in King's Landing, Sansa was planning her escape too. With the help of Shae, her handmaiden, she learned of a secret path beneath the castle, the same tunnels used long ago by Maegor the Cruel. The city was preparing for Joffrey's wedding, which meant the guards were distracted. It was her only chance. 2 nights before the wedding, Sansa dressed as a servant, carrying a basket over her head and walking with her eyes lowered. Her heart pounded with every step. Shae walked beside her, pretending to give orders. They slipped past the guards and entered the tunnels. But outside the city, something unexpected happened. As Sansa reached the riverbank where a small boat waited, she saw a figure on a black horse. For a moment, she thought it was a Lannister soldier. But when the rider dismounted, she gasped. "Jon." "Sansa," he said, eyes wide. "You're really here?" She ran into his arms, her fear melting into relief. For the first time in years, she felt safe. "How did you know?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "I just knew you needed me. They wasted no time." With Shae's help, they crossed the river and rode hard into the woods. Behind them, the city slept, unaware that the king's future bride had just vanished. But it wouldn't be long before Joffrey found out, and when he did, all of Westeros would burn. The wind was cold, but not as cold as the fear running through Sansa's blood. Every sound in the woods made her flinch. Every crack of a branch felt like the gallop of Lannister horses behind them. But Jon rode beside her, steady and silent, his sword strapped to his back and Ghost moving like a shadow ahead of them. That gave her strength. They didn't speak much for the first few hours. There was too much to process, too many memories, too much danger, too much pain. It wasn't until the sun began to rise behind them that Jon finally broke the silence. "You look tired," he said gently, looking over at her as they rode through the misty trees. "I haven't slept in weeks," Sansa admitted. "Joffrey, he's a monster, Jon. He would have killed me slowly. He enjoyed hurting me." Jon's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the reins harder. "If I ever see him, I'll—" "Don't," she whispered. "You'll die. He has too much power. Too many people fear him." Jon didn't respond. But in his heart, he made a silent vow. If the day ever came, he would put a sword through Joffrey's heart. They stopped at a small stream to let the horses drink. Sansa sat on a flat rock, rubbing her aching legs while Jon kept watch. He'd been quiet ever since he left Castle Black, but now that she was here, safe beside him, something inside him started to thaw. "You've changed," he said finally. "So have you," she replied. "You're harder now," Jon nodded. I've seen death. I've killed the wall. It doesn't make men better. It just shows what's already inside." Sansa looked away. "I've seen death too, more than I ever wanted." She didn't speak of Septa Mordane's beheading, or her father's, or the bruises on her arms from Joffrey's guards. She didn't have to. Jon already knew. That night they camped under the cover of thick trees. Jon made a small fire, just enough for warmth, but not enough to draw attention. Ghost curled up near Sansa while Jon sharpened his sword in silence. "You know they'll send men after us," Sansa whispered. "I know," Jon replied. "That's why we're not going home." "Not yet." Sansa turned her head sharply. "Not to Winterfell?" "Winterfell is gone, burned, taken. The Boltons have it now." She blinked, stunned. "The Boltons? But they were our bannermen." Jon looked at the fire. "They betrayed the North." "Took the castle." "Killed anyone loyal to the Starks." Sansa's lips trembled. "Then where do we go?" "We go beyond the wall," Jon said quietly. "I know people there. The free folk. They don't care about kings or queens or names. They'll hide us." Sansa felt panic rise. "Beyond the wall. Isn't that where the dead walk?" Jon looked into her eyes. "Yes, but the living are just as dangerous now." Before she could argue more, Ghost lifted his head and growled low. Jon stood instantly, hand on his sword. Footsteps, voices, "They're here." Sansa's breath caught in her throat. "How, so fast?" Jon helped her up, eyes scanning the dark woods. "They must have followed the river. We need to move, now." They grabbed their things and mounted their horses, riding into the darkness. Behind them, faintly, the red glow of torches danced between the trees. Soldiers, Joffrey's men. They rode through thick brush, branches tearing at their clothes and faces. Sansa clung to the horse, terrified, while Jon urged his mount faster. Ghost ran ahead, leading the way through the narrowest paths. Then they reached a dead end, a steep cliff with jagged rocks below. Sansa pulled her horse to a stop, heart pounding. "We're trapped." Jon looked around quickly. Then he spotted it, a narrow trail along the cliff's edge. Barely wide enough for a single horse. "This way," he said. "It's too dangerous. They'll kill us if we stay." Without waiting, Jon guided his horse along the edge. The path was crumbling, stones falling beneath the hooves. The drop below was deadly, but they had no choice. Sansa followed, her hands shaking as she held the reins. Halfway across they heard shouting behind them. The soldiers had caught up. Arrows flew past, one grazing Jon's arm. He didn't flinch. "Sansa, go!" She reached the other side just as Jon's horse slipped, hooves skidding on loose stone. Sansa screamed, but Jon leaped off, grabbing the rocky ledge before falling. Ghost snarled, leaping back to pull at Jon's cloak. With one arm, Sansa crawled forward, grabbing Jon's wrist. Together, with shaking arms and hearts full of fear, they pulled him up. They collapsed in the mud, breathing hard. Behind them, the soldiers had stopped. The trail was too narrow. They wouldn't risk it, for now. They were safe. But in the distance, the war drums of the South were beating, and Joffrey wanted his bride back, dead or alive. They walked the next morning. The horses were tired, and so were they. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the woods had already started to stir. Birds called through the trees, and somewhere far off, a wolf howled. Sansa tightened her cloak and stayed close to Jon. Neither of them had slept much after the cliff incident. Every creak of a branch, every gust of wind felt like a warning. "I keep hearing his voice," Sansa whispered. "Joffrey, laughing, promising to break me. Do you think he'll stop?" Jon shook his head. "No, he'll send more men. Faster ones, smarter. If he can't have you, he'll make sure no one does." Sansa's face went pale. "Then we can't stop again." "We won't," Jon replied. "We'll ride north until the trees turn white." He was talking about the haunted forest beyond the wall. Most people feared it, with its endless cold and ancient whispers. But Jon had lived near it. He knew how to survive there. It was the one place the Lannisters wouldn't follow. Not because they couldn't, but because they were too scared to. By midday, they found an abandoned cottage deep in the forest. Jon checked it first, sword drawn, every step slow. The place had clearly been left in a rush. Old stew rotted in a pot. A chair was broken in the corner. Scratches lined the wooden door. "Wildlings?" Sansa asked. "Or worse," Jon muttered. "But it's shelter." They rested for a few hours. Sansa dozed off in the corner while Ghost stood watch at the door. Jon sat at the window, sharpening Longclaw, his mind full of questions. Why now? Why had the letter come to him at Castle Black? Who sent it? Someone inside the city had risked everything to warn him. Who still cares about us? He whispered to himself. He thought of Arya, Bran, even Robb, though he was likely deep in war by now. The Starks were scattered, and it felt like all of them were being hunted. Sansa stirred and opened her eyes. "Jon," he turned, "you should sleep more." "I had a dream," she said softly. "A father. He told me not to be afraid." Jon didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to believe in dreams. But this world had taken too much already. They left before dusk. The sun was dying, and the forest grew colder with every step. By now, they were deep in the north. No more signs of towns or soldiers. Just endless trees and the quiet sound of snow starting to fall. Sansa looked up. "First snow," Jon glanced at the sky. "Then winter is near." They rode until night fell, then made camp beside a frozen creek. Jon built a fire inside a ring of stones, and Sansa wrapped herself in furs. They shared some dried meat Jon had stolen from Castle Black, tough but warm in the belly. Suddenly Ghost stood up, ears forward. Jon froze. "Someone's coming!" They heard it, soft crunching in the snow. A figure emerged from the trees, alone, cloaked in brown, face hidden by a scarf. But he wasn't a Lannister. No golden armor, no red banners. Just a simple man, carrying no weapon but a walking stick. "Stay back," Jon warned, sword half drawn. The man raised his hands. "Easy, I'm not here to fight." "Then what are you here for?" "I followed you," the man said, "from the river crossing. I saw you escape. I saw the soldiers." Sansa stood slowly. "Why didn't you tell them where we went?" "Because I don't serve the lion," he said, pulling down his scarf. He was older, maybe in his 50s. Pale eyes, a deep scar on his cheek. "I serve the wolf." Jon's grip tightened. "You knew my father?" "I did. Ned Stark saved my life once, long ago. Before the rebellion." Sansa stepped closer. "Then who are you?" The man bowed his head. "You can call me Harwin. I was sworn to House Stark. I've been hiding ever since the South went mad." Jon and Sansa exchanged a look. "There are more of us," Harwin said. "Loyal men, scattered, in the hills, the valleys, waiting. If you come with me, I'll take you to them." "Why now?" Jon asked. "Why help us?" Harwin's voice grew harder. "Because word has spread. The North remembers, and it remembers the Red Keep's cruelty. If you're ready to rise, we'll rise with you." Jon looked at Sansa. She took a breath. Her eyes no longer full of fear. Now something stronger burned there. Something her mother once carried. "We're ready," she said. The fire crackled between them. The wolves were waking. They followed Harwin through the thick forest, their breath white in the air as winter crept closer with every step. The man walked like he was part of the trees, quiet, cautious, and always watching. Jon kept one hand on Longclaw. Sansa, wrapped in a heavy cloak of dark grey fur, watched the shadows with steady eyes. She didn't ask questions. "Not yet?" Harwin finally spoke after hours of silence. "The place we're going, you won't find it on any map. It was built during the First Rebellion, hidden for times just like these." Jon narrowed his eyes. "And how do we know this isn't a trap?" "You don't," Harwin replied without looking back. "But if I wanted you dead, I would have sent those Lannister dogs to the edge of that cliff." Jon gave a small nod. "Fair point." They reached a narrow path between two moss-covered rocks. Harwin whistled twice, low and sharp. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the ground shifted. A door, made from roots and stone, opened inward. Two men appeared, armed with axes and old northern steel. Their faces lit up when they saw Sansa and Jon. "By the old gods," one of them whispered, dropping to his knee. "A Stark." Harwin stepped aside. "Let them pass. They are the future." Inside the hidden stronghold, the walls were carved out of stone and packed with hay for warmth. The people inside, rough men and weathered women, looked up in shock. Some had tears in their eyes. One even whispered Sansa's name like it was a prayer. "They thought you were all dead," Harwin said. "But we knew." We waited. Sansa looked around, overwhelmed. These weren't just survivors. These were Northerners who had refused to bow to the Boltons. People who believed in the old ways, in wolves and weirwoods. People who hadn't forgotten. We don't have an army, Jon said cautiously. We're not here to start a war. Harwin turned to him serious. Maybe not. But the war has already started, whether you want it or not. Sansa stepped forward. Her voice was steady. What do you mean? Harwin looked around the room. You don't know, do you? About Robb, Jon stiffened. What about him? Harwin's face twisted with sorrow. He's dead. The Red Wedding, the Freys and the Boltons turned on him. Killed him. Killed your mother too. Sansa covered her mouth, stumbling back against the wall. The news hit her like a sword to the chest. Jon caught her, holding her tight as her knees gave out. No, she whispered. Not Robb. Not Mother. Jon's face was pale. His jaw clenched so tightly it shook. They're killing us one by one, Harwin's voice lowered. And they'll keep going until the Stark name is gone forever. That's why I brought you here. You need to understand something. The North isn't dead. It's sleeping, but it's starting to wake. And it needs a face, a name, a reason to rise again. Jon looked at Sansa. Her face was wet with silent tears, but her eyes burned with something fierce. I'm no warrior, she said softly. I don't know how to lead armies. You don't have to be a warrior, Harwin said. You just have to be a Stark. Jon stepped forward. And what about me? Harwin paused. You've got wolf blood too, boy. Even if they call you Snow. I've seen bastards rise higher than kings. Jon didn't answer, but his heart thumped louder than the fire crackling beside them. He had always belonged nowhere, not in Winterfell, not on the wall, but now, here in this cave of rebels and runaways, he felt something different. Purpose. That night, they sat by the fire as stories of Robb's final battle were told in quiet voices. Sansa didn't speak. She just listened, every word carving itself into her memory like ice on stone. Her brother had died trying to do the right thing. So had her mother. They wouldn't make that mistake. As the others slept, Jon and Sansa stood near the entrance, watching the snow fall. I never thought we'd end up here, she whispered. Neither did I, Jon replied. But maybe this is where we were always meant to be. Sansa looked at him. Do you believe we can win? Jon didn't answer right away. He looked out into the dark woods where wolves howled in the distance. I believe we have to try. From somewhere above, a raven cried. And miles away in the heart of King's Landing, Joffrey screamed with rage when he heard the news. The wolf girl lives. The bastard rides with her, and the North was stirring. By morning the word had already spread. Across the snow-covered villages of the North, whispered in taverns and traded between travelling merchants, the story was the same. A Stark girl lives. The bastard rides beside her. And suddenly, eyes that had been dull with hopelessness were lighting up again. In the stronghold, more people had arrived overnight. Former bannermen, blacksmiths, sons of shepherds, all dressed in furs and armed with nothing more than old steel and a thirst for vengeance. Most had lost fathers, brothers, wives to the Boltons or the Freys. Now they bowed their heads to Jon and Sansa, asking only one thing. What would you have us do? Jon stood near the fire, uncomfortable in their presence. He wasn't used to being followed. At Castle Black he had obeyed, fought, survived, but here they looked at him like he was a leader, like he had a crown on his head. I'm not a king, he said to Harwin in private. And she's not a queen. We're just two people running from the south. Harwin gave a small grin. That may be. But in the north, sometimes two wolves are all it takes to chase away the lions. Sansa, meanwhile, sat in a small chamber, surrounded by 3 northern women sewing a banner. A white direwolf on grey. She didn't ask them to. She hadn't even spoken when they began. But something about it felt right. She still mourned Robb, her mother, her father. But now the pain had changed. It had sharpened, hardened, and for the first time since King's Landing, she didn't feel powerless. She felt cold and strong. They expect you to lead, Jon said when he entered the room. Sansa didn't look up. And what do you expect? I expect you to survive. That's all I ever wanted. She finally turned to him. Surviving isn't enough anymore. That night, as snow piled outside and the fire burned low, a scout arrived, half frozen and bleeding from a shallow arrow wound. "They're coming!" he gasped. A Lannister party, 50 strong, red cloaks, golden armor. They crossed the river 2 days ago. They're hunting. Jon helped the man sit. How far are they? 2 days, maybe less. They have a tracker, Harwin swore under his breath. Bloody dogs won't stop, Sansa stood. Then we don't run. Everyone turned to her. They expect us to hide, she said. To scatter. But if we do that, they'll find us one by one and hang us like traitors. We strike first. You want to fight? One of the older men asked. With what? Axes and farm tools. Sansa didn't blink. With everything we have. And everything they don't, she turned to Jon. Set traps. Use the land. Ambush them before they reach the valley. Make them regret stepping into our woods, Jon stared at her. This wasn't the quiet girl who once dreamed of princes. This was someone else now. A Stark reborn, he nodded. We'll hit them at Black Hollow Pass, narrow ground. They won't see it coming, Harwin grinned. Now that's a northern plan. By morning the camp was alive with preparation. Trees were felled, pits were dug, oil was poured into clay jars for firebombs. Arrows were sharpened and cloaks stained with mud and soot to blend in with the trees. It wasn't an army, it was a pack, and Jon was at the front of it. The day before the fight, he sat with Sansa outside the cave, watching the snow drift down. If we lose, he said, they'll kill us slowly. Like your father. Sansa looked up. Then we don't lose. He looked at her and realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore, neither was he. That night the forest fell silent. The wind died. The moon hid behind clouds, and the wolves of the north waited in the shadows, teeth bared, hearts pounding. The Lannister men came just before dawn, cocky, loud, dragging their banners like trophies. They didn't know the land. They didn't know the snow hid spikes beneath it. They didn't hear ghosts slipping through the trees. The first firebomb landed with a crack, and the second sent 5 men screaming into the snow. Arrows flew. Traps snapped. Horses panicked, and from the tree line came a cry, not from a soldier, but from a woman, for the north. Sansa's voice, and behind her the wolves charged. It wasn't a battle. It was a message, the north remembers. The snow was red by morning. Bodies lay scattered across the white field, their golden armor glinting faintly beneath the pale sun. Ravens circled above, waiting for their feast. Smoke still rose from broken carts and charred tents. The Lannisters had walked into the trap blind, and they'd paid the price. Jon stood in the middle of the battlefield, his sword blackened with soot and blood. His breath came in heavy clouds. Ghost was beside him, fur streaked with crimson, eyes sharp as burning coals. Around them, northern men cheered hoarsely, but there was no joy, only grim satisfaction. Harwin limped up beside him, his arm tied in a rough bandage. 50 men from the south, not one left standing. That'll make them think twice before sending more, Jon nodded. They'll send more anyway. Then we'll kill more, Harwin said simply, spitting into the snow. Sansa came through the trees, wrapped in a dark cloak, her hair hidden beneath a fur hood. She looked at the bodies, the snow, the fire still smoldering, and she didn't flinch. There was sadness in her eyes, but no pity. They'll write songs about this one day, one man said proudly. Sansa turned her gaze on him, her voice calm but cold. Then they should sing about how the South bled the North dry first. This isn't victory. This is justice long overdue. The man lowered his eyes. Jon walked to her side. You don't have to see this. Yes, I do, she replied. I spent too long pretending monsters didn't exist. Now I need to remember what they looked like. Jon studied her face. There was something new in her. A strength that wasn't born of swords or armor, but of surviving cruelty and still standing tall. She wasn't a girl anymore. She was something sharper. That night they burned the Lannister dead. The fire roared against the dark sky, and Sansa stood before it, speaking words her father once told her as a child. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies. She looked around at the men, at Jon, at the faces that had risked their lives for her. But the pack survives, a quiet murmur spread through the group. Heads bowed. Some men wiped their eyes. The flames reflected in their armor like molten gold. Jon felt something shift then. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. They had become something larger, a spark in the cold north, one that could grow into fire. Later, when most had fallen asleep, Jon sat near the dying embers, staring into the coals. His arm ached from a shallow wound, but his mind hurt more. Sansa approached quietly and sat beside him. "You've barely spoken since the fight." "I've been thinking," he said softly. "About what comes next." "More fighting, I imagine," she replied with a faint, humorless smile. He glanced at her. "If we keep this up, we'll draw every enemy in Westeros to us. The Lannisters, the Boltons, even the Freys. We can't win against all of them." Sansa turned her head toward the stars. "Then we don't fight alone," Jon frowned. "Who would stand with us?" "The people who still remember my father," she said. "The Mormonts, the Glovers, the Yumbers, if any still live. They only need to see that the Starks still breathe, that we're not ghosts." Jon thought of Lady Lyanna Mormont, of old houses that once swore their oaths to Winterfell. Maybe she was right. The North had been beaten, but not broken. "We'll need a home," he said quietly. "A place to gather strength." Sansa's gaze hardened. "Winterfell," Jon looked at her, startled. "The Boltons hold it. Ramsay Bolton won't give it up." "Then we'll take it from him," she said, her voice steady. "Brick by brick if we have to." He wanted to argue, to tell her it was madness, but when he saw the determination in her eyes, he didn't. "You sound like Robb," he said finally. She smiled sadly. "No, Robb fought for honor. I'll fight for vengeance." The wind shifted, cold and heavy, carrying the smell of burned flesh and pine. Ghost raised his head, suddenly, ears twitching. "What is it?" Jon asked. Harwin appeared from the shadows, his face grave. A raven came. From the wall, Jon stood.
"From Castle Black?"
Harwin nodded. "The message says only this: the dead are moving." The fire cracked behind them. Sansa's breath caught in her throat. Jon stared northward, toward the mountains and the endless white beyond them. He knew those words. He'd heard them whispered before by men who froze in their sleep. The living were coming for them from the south. But something else was stirring in the far north. Jon sheathed Longclaw. "Then it seems," he said quietly, "we've got more than just lions to worry about." Sansa looked at him, the flames dancing in her eyes. "Then the wolves will have to be ready for both." And in the distance, far beyond the wall, a horn blew, long and low. The North wasn't just remembering anymore. It was awakening. They broke camp the next morning with little talk. There was no need for words now. The night had brought more than firelight and uneasy dreams. It brought truth. The dead were moving. Jon packed his things with quiet focus, strapping Longclaw to his back and checking the condition of the horses. Harwin had gathered a small scouting party to head west, to warn the nearby mountain clans. Every man who could hold a sword was being pulled into this fight now, even those who once vowed never to kneel to any lord again. Sansa moved through the camp, silent but present. The people treated her differently now, no longer just a symbol. She was the Stark girl who fought back. Some called her Lady of the North. Others just called her Hope. Jon approached her near the edge of the clearing. "We can't stay here. The Lannisters will return, stronger, angrier." Sansa nodded. "Then it's time. We take the North back." Jon studied her face. It no longer carried softness, but neither was it cruel. It was calm, cold, like winter itself, you're sure? She looked out over the snow-covered pines. "It's not about being sure. It's about having nothing left to lose." And with that they rode, 24 strong, with more joining at every pass and hill. Villagers, farmers, blacksmiths, broken men and proud sons, all of them with stories soaked in Bolton or Lannister blood. Their path led straight toward Winterfell, but not before passing through lands scarred by betrayal. One afternoon, after crossing the icy river at Broken Fang Bridge, they reached a burned village, the remains of House Serwyn's lands. The houses were ash. The snow was red from months-old blood. Crows perched on collapsed rooftops, too fat to fly. Sansa dismounted and walked through the ruins, the crunch of ash under her boots. She saw a doll burned half to the face lying in the snow. She picked it up and held it for a long time. Jon came beside her. They left no one alive. Ramsay did this, she said. He's not a man. He's rot in a crown. Jon knew she hated Joffrey. But when she said Ramsay's name, it came from somewhere deeper. A wound still bleeding. We'll make him pay, he said. She didn't reply. She just dropped the doll and walked away. That night the wind turned sharper. Snow blew sideways, and the sky darkened faster than it should have. Jon built a small fire behind a rock wall, but it barely kept the cold away. Harwin joined him, his face pale. "Something's wrong," the older man muttered. "The crows are flying south." In the dark, Jon followed his gaze. Dozens of black wings, slicing across the sky, vanishing into the night. Then they heard it, a distant sound. Not wolves, not wind, but something low, like ice grinding against ice. Ghost growled deep in his chest. Harwin's eyes widened. "It's true, then." Jon stood slowly. "We move at dawn. No more waiting, no more resting. We take Winterfell, and we take it soon. But what about the dead? We deal with them after we take back our home. Without Winterfell, we're scattered. We're nothing." Harwin nodded grimly. By morning they were marching again. The closer they got to Winterfell, the colder the world seemed to become. No birds, no animals, just silence and snow. 3 days later, their small army stopped just beyond a ridge. Jon crawled to the top and looked down. There it was, Winterfell, his home. Its towers still stood, but the heart of it had changed. The walls were blackened. The flayed man banners of House Bolton flew in the wind. He saw guards patrolling with dogs, Ramsay's favorite hounds. Jon clenched his fists. "They've desecrated it," Sansa whispered behind him. "Yes," Jon said, voice low. "But it still stands, and we're taking it back," Harwin joined them. "We can't do it alone. They'll have twice our numbers. Then we make them bleed before the gates," Jon replied. "Starve them. Draw them out. Turn their fear against them." Sansa's voice was colder than the wind. "And when we find Ramsay—" Jon turned to her. "He's yours." She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. That night, under the stars and snow, Jon stood before the tired, frozen band of Northerners. He looked into their eyes, men who had lost everything and followed him anyway. "We were born in winter," he told them. "Raised by it. Shaped by it. And now it's time to remind the Boltons who the North truly belongs to." Harwin lifted his sword. "For Winterfell." The cry rose like a storm. "For the North. For House Stark. For the Pack!" And from the shadow of the trees, as the wolves howled and firelight burned in their eyes, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark prepared for war, not for a throne, not for revenge, but to take back their home. Dawn came slowly, smothered by thick clouds and falling snow. Winterfell stood in the distance like a ghost, wrapped in fog and guarded by steel. The flayed man banners of House Bolton whipped in the wind, bloody, ugly reminders of what had been lost. But today, the wolves had come home. Jon knelt in the snow, fingers pressed to the frozen earth, feeling the cold bite into his skin. Around him the men were silent, lined up behind trees and rocky slopes. Harwin was sharpening his blade. The archers were stringing their bows. Ghost stood beside Jon, tail low, growling softly toward the gates of Winterfell. Sansa stood above them on a hill, wrapped in her thick grey cloak, hair braided like her mother once wore it. She didn't look afraid. Her eyes were set on the walls she'd grown up within, now twisted by Ramsay's poison. She could almost hear her younger self inside, laughing in the godswood, chasing Arya through the snow. But those memories were gone, burned, stolen. She took a deep breath and raised her voice. No more hiding, no more running, no more fear. The wind carried her words across the snow. "We are Starks of Winterfell." She turned to the men. "And today, we take back our name." The men raised their weapons without shouting. There was no need. Their silence held more weight than screams. They were the North. They did not beg. They took back what was theirs. Jon raised his hand. A long moment passed. Then he dropped it. The wolves charged. Snow exploded underfoot as the first wave of northern rebels rushed the gates. Arrows flew from the trees, striking Bolton guards before they could raise the alarm. Ghost leapt into the chaos, ripping into the throats of Ramsay's hounds before they could bark. Jon led the second wave, sword in hand, striking through the confusion with brutal precision. Every swing was for Robb, every strike was for their father, and every death was one step closer to home. Inside the walls, Ramsay Bolton stood on the battlements, smiling as flames rose in the outer yard. His eyes shone with amusement. "They came," he whispered. "Like good little puppies." Maester Tybalt beside him trembled. "My lord, their numbers—" "Let them come," Ramsay sneered. "I've killed better men than Jon Snow in my sleep." "And the girl?" His grin widened. "She'll return to me on her knees. Or in chains." He turned and walked away, calling for his personal guards and his favorite hounds. But Sansa wasn't waiting to be captured. She and Harwin led a small group through a secret tunnel, an old escape passage her father once showed her as a child. They emerged inside the castle just as the fighting reached the courtyard. The Boltons were falling back. Jon had breached the gates. Sansa moved through the chaos like a ghost. Past fallen men, shattered banners, burning carts. Her eyes locked on one thing: the tower where she had once been kept, where Ramsay had broken her, where he had thought he'd broken her forever. She climbed the stairs, every step slower than the last. At the top, she pushed the door open. Ramsay was there. He turned, surprised, and for the first time, not smiling, she stepped forward, the blade in her hand shaking slightly. "I told you you'd pay," she said. Ramsay laughed, trying to play the monster. "You think you're strong now, little dove? You're still mine." "No," she said, eyes steady. "I never was." He charged her fast and cruel, but he never made it. Jon burst through the door behind him, slamming Ramsay to the ground in a heartbeat. He raised Longclaw high, his rage boiling. "Jon," Sansa said sharply. "Stop!" Jon froze. She stepped forward. "He's mine." Jon backed away without a word. Sansa knelt beside Ramsay as he writhed on the floor. He tried to speak, but she pressed the blade gently to his throat. "You stole my home, my body, my life." She leaned closer. "Now I take it all back." And she did. When it was over, she stood tall. Jon watched her silently, his heart heavy but proud. Down below, the fighting ended. The last Bolton soldier fell, and the gates of Winterfell were closed once again. But this time, by Starks, they buried the dead in the snow and tore down the flayed banners. In their place, the dire wolf of House Stark rose once more, grey on white. Proud and unbroken, Winterfell was theirs. Sansa stood atop the walls that night, watching the snow fall gently over her reclaimed home. Jon joined her. Silent. "We did it," she whispered. Jon nodded. "But winter is far from over." She looked northward. "Let it come. We're ready now." And far beyond the wall, the true winter stirred. But for now, in the heart of the north, the wolves had returned, and they would never be driven out again.